6 years ago, we were struck by the deadliest act of anti-Semitic violence in our nation's history. It was a quiet Shabbat morning, the first after Simchat Torah concluded our joyous and uplifting high holiday season. But the shalom of that Shabbat morning was shattered by the tragic news of the shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. 11 were murdered, 6 were injured, simply because they were Jews at shul. We were shaken. We were scared. The days that followed, however, came an outpouring of support from all corners of society that buoyed our spirits. We had a gathering here in Boca Raton of more than 2,000 people, and the voices of concern from leaders came from a variety of directions, twinged with the diversity of accents and perspectives. The following Shabbat, our sanctuary literally overflowed as the campaign to show up for Shabbat, led by American Jewish Committee, drew folks to come together in strength and solidarity. The love and the warmth rang true. That was in 2018. Over the following 5 years, things seem to have changed. When we woke up on October 7th last year and heard the news of what was unfolding in Israel, our hearts were shattered. We learned that the scope of the evil was something not seen in generations. It ripped open our emotional heartstrings, raw from the rising incidents of violence like Tree of Life, and in Poway, and in Colleyville. We began to realize how terrible the attack was, how many lives destroyed, how many hostages in captivity. Our pain set in, a pain that has been almost too great to bear. What we needed in that moment is what we needed after Pittsburgh and after Poway and after Colleyville, the support of our friends and neighbors telling us that they were with us and cared for us, like the grieving friends that we had been. But what we heard after October 7th was something else. Near silence. There was initially a great concern for Israel and for Israelis, but there was never much concern for Jews in the U.S. at all. Few public statements of solidarity with our Jewish neighbors, a deafening dearth of texts or calls from friends from other faith traditions. No, just wanted to check on you. My rabbinic colleagues and I around the country, we all experienced it. We shared with one another privately and in groups how disappointed we were, how hurt we were, and how deeply alone we felt. Fostering and maintaining interfaith relationships has been an important part of what makes Temple Bethel. It's what we have stood for decades. But after years of building relationships with the churches in town, Catholic, Protestant, Latter-day Saint, and the mosques up the road, after meaningful moments of getting to know one another, of marking Thanksgivings together, of showing up for them in the wake of tragedies that struck their communities around the world, the lack of concern for us was almost overwhelming. 3 weeks after the attack, my phone finally rang. It was a pastor in town with whom I was not particularly close, but he called to apologize. He was honest and sincere when he said, "It just didn't occur to me that what happened in Israel would mean what it means to American Jews. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. What can I do?" he asked. I invited him to come to Shabbat services that Friday to show his support, which he did, and brought some folks from his church along with him. Our friendship has grown since that day, but his story really has become the exception that proved the rule. As Jews, as Zionists, as Ohavei Yisrael, lovers of Israel, we were in for a lonely, hard, draining year. From the first days after Israel was attacked, even before the IDF responded, we started to hear calls that the IDF in Israel was acting immorally. I felt my mind start to spin on so many occasions as I heard people, some of whom to that point I had deep respect for, misrepresent and mischaracterize so much of what had transpired over the past weeks and months. They were quick to blame Israel for attacking schools or hospitals, mosques, only to learn later that the IDF wasn't responsible. Heaven forbid they acknowledge that. They blamed Israel for civilian casualties when those civilians were being used as pawns by Israel's enemies to protect themselves and maximize the number of deaths they could try to blame on Israel. They inflated casualty counts and accused Israel of genocide. It's Israel's enemies who are bent on genocidal desires, wishing to cleanse the land of its Jewish inhabitants, targeting women, children, the elderly, without any concern for their people either. And as I heard each of these accusations, each demonstrably false, I felt as if we had gone through the looking glass into a moral wonderland with Tweedledee and Tweedledum telling us that up was down and down was up. As the war has recently intensified in the north, that moral inversion has continued. Since October 8th, rockets from the north have destroyed dozens of communities and displaced some 60,000 Israelis from their homes. Just 2 days ago, we saw Israel targeted with 181 ballistic missiles. Thank God for Iron Dome and other protective technologies that kept her generally safe. Yet the world would have us believe that the fighting in the north started a few weeks ago with the pager and radio operation, not the violation of Israel's sovereignty, an internationally recognized border, and the right of her citizens to live in safety and security. Some of the loudest voices in the choir of anti-Israel bias have come from the folks we thought were our friends. For the past many years, we have been amplifying our social justice work with particular focus on supporting and working for the benefit of historically marginalized communities, like racial minorities and the LGBTQ+ community. I'm so immensely proud of the work that we have done, like building Beth, Pride, our group of LGBTQ+ folk and allies, who've helped us imagine and reimagine Pride events at the temple. Our racial equity work has inspired me. We've traveled as a congregation to historic sites in our nation's struggle for civil rights, read important works that challenged our presumptions about race, and have worked to build relationships with the historically black churches and their leaders. Both efforts undergirded by our tradition's teaching to celebrate the divinity and the diversity of humanity. I mention these two efforts intentionally because I've also struggled when I've seen advocates for the LGBTQ+ and the communities of color be some of the most challenging and vociferous critics of Israel, some going so far as to calling for the end of the Jewish state. More than a few times I've been asked, understandably so, Rabbi, we were with that group of people when they needed us, and now they are standing up for our enemies. Do we still care about them? It's a fair question. There is an element of allyship that is transactional. I'll be there for you if you be there for me. It's part of what I expected our interfaith partners to do after October 7th, which is why I was hurt when they didn't. We were there for them. They weren't there for us. But our racial equity work and our work supporting the LGBTQ+ community, our social justice work, was never transactional. Supporting marginalized communities is a manifestation of the values that emanate from within our tradition. To see the holiness in each person created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and to celebrate the magnificent diversity of humanity as an illustration of God's awesome love. In that work, we partnered with others who may have engaged for their own reasons. And some of those folks have failed the moral test of seeing us Jews and our humanity. It's infuriating, it's dismaying, that these folks' moral compass that I thought was so similar to ours could actually be so different. And there is no question that my thoughts about the individuals who would proudly wear a Queers for Hamas shirt have changed considerably. It's been a hard and heavy year. It's been a year, and the hostages still are not home, and the fighting is ongoing, getting worse, and it's not clear when or how there'll be a peaceful night anytime soon. I can't imagine the depths of the emotions that Israelis are feeling, but I know for me and for us, seeing Israel at war and anti-Semitism raging its ugliness in ways we haven't seen in generations in our half of the world, that things are just really hard. It's been hard because we as Jews have been taught over and over and over again to pursue peace, to watch our people's army do the tragic but necessary work of waging a defensive war. Thank God we have a state of Israel and an IDF who can defend our people. But as she has done so, we cannot turn a blind eye to the absolutely heartbreakingly, devastatingly tragic reality of the loss of life in Gaza. Ours is a tradition that holds up the sanctity of life and each individual. Not a single innocent life should be taken for granted, minimized, or thought to be expendable. Not an innocent Gazan, nor an innocent Israeli. Our value of self-defense and preservation sits in tension with our value of human life. And that tension brings up anger and pain. Israel's safety and security is non-negotiable, nor is our right as American Jews to live out our tradition here. And yet, innocent lives are put in harm's way when Israel needs to defend herself. Our tradition calls upon us to pursue justice in our community. We need to hold to account those who would spread anti-Jewish hatred in it. We need to take care of our own emotional needs and find moments of peace to replenish our energies, even as our Am Yisrael needs us to show up for one another. Holding these values, when they are in tension with one another, is hard, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. But holding them, nonetheless, is the Jewish way. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the rabbis taught the importance of recording each individual opinion, even if the majority felt the other way. In the great debates between Hillel and Shammai, debates that our Talmud declared to have been for the sake of heaven, what holds Hillel's opinions above Shammai's time and time again is that while Shammai listened only to himself, Hillel would listen to Shammai, internalize his values and his reasonings, and then incorporate the best of it along with his own. Closer to our own time, the great thinker of the last century, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, taught that those who would look for a clear bottom line in everything, including matters of faith, upon seeing the mighty struggles of opposing views, will ask in agitation, how can the Torah be learned this way? If there are two mutually exclusive ways of interpreting a single statement, and each carries its own truth, do we not have dualism? No. He answered rhetorically, objecting, it is possible to have a living Torah. Is it possible to have a living Torah without the struggle of opposites, without disputes, without the many permutations of the ideas? No. Our tradition invites and challenges us to hold at once multiple ideas and values, even if and when they conflict. We are guided to see the questions we face through the lens of the both and. We are taught that in a moment, even if we do have to decide which way to follow, we should hold the truth of both sides in our minds as good. It is incredibly powerful when we orient ourselves to make our way through life collecting ideas and not discarding them. It allows us to be empathetic and understanding. We should not let the pain we are in cloud our judgment or block us from actualizing our values. Our empathy is not a limited resource, and neither is our ability to hold on to our values. So when we witness the devastation that defending our people necessitates, we can feel empathy. Empathy for the loss of innocent lives, and emotional pain at the destruction that they are suffering. And it is not an abandonment of our Zionism, of our commitment to our people's right to live in safety in Israel or anywhere in the world. That empathy is the manifestation of our Jewishness and our humanity. We wish that we could have a safe and secure Israel without the need for a loss of a single life. It's Israel's enemies who demand that those wishes be in conflict. As Jews, we can hold that tension and not sacrifice our morals or our values. Maintaining our commitment to justice for those who would have been marginalized does not mean that I have to stand with or let myself be cast with everyone who stands with those folks. We may share one value and not see eye to eye on many others. We do not need to let ourselves be put in the position of having to leverage our commitment to justice and freedom for Jews over or under other groups. We get to stand in defense of all of our values and should not let anyone tell us that we have to abandon one to pursue another. Our tradition is unique and complicated, but our ability to hold values in tension, to remain true to ourselves, to find our way in the world is part of what makes it beautiful. The rabbis of the Talmud skillfully turned what seemed to be irreconcilable conflict into harmonies of moral expression. How did they do it? They held on to what was most important to them, even when they had to prioritize one over the other. Ours is the tradition of the both and, not the either or. Ours is a people who will stand up for what we believe in, even if we have to stand alone. In a moment, we will stand before the ark. We will call upon Avinu Malkeinu to hear our prayers, to forgive us, and to renew us in this new year. On these Yamim Noraim, we imagine God sitting not with Din, judgment, or Rachamim, mercy alone, but with both and. When we appear before the Holy One for judgment, we ask that God hold both of these values just as we strive to in our own lives. And as we think of the year that has passed, a year of pain and sadness, of grief and tension, we pray that we can navigate these troubling times grounded in our moral values, and that our inscription for the year that begins will be for blessing, for wisdom, for empathy, for strength, and for peace. Amen. Shana Tova.